Hi there, this is Ron Rogers, and I'm going to talk about a flight evaluation of the Dornier 328 jet. Now, as you know, most of these flight evaluations I did about 25 years or so ago, and a lot of these are kind of historic. But, you know, when I talk about the 777-200 or the 777-300, when I did flight evaluations on that, of course, those aircraft are still flying and have a good history and stuff like that. But it's kind of sad when I looked back on this era because I've got a couple aircraft I'm going to discuss here shortly, and I think as it, most people know, Dornier went out of business. I'm going to talk about Fokker aircraft; they went out of business. This was in the 90s, and there was a lot of competition on the short haul regional market. And there was a lot of work going on and a lot of expansion. And in fact, in the second paragraph of my article, I talk about that Fairchild Dornier had some very ambitious plans to launch a family of jet aircraft. And I make the comment, stay tuned for future flight evaluations. Well, part of the sad part of this is we were quite extensively involved, my committee and I, in meeting with these manufacturers, the engineers. We had a lot of discussions, and I'm going to relate some personal interactions we also had, especially with Dornier. And shortly after this evaluation, they went out of business, and it's really kind of sad for those people, and you know, the people I knew, the people we worked with, and things like that. So that's kind of the entry there, and I'm going to talk about the evaluation as such and some of the interesting aspects. Now, as far as the 328 jet, supposedly one small carrier out of Denver is operating them, one charter carrier is operating. Of course, a lot of these airplanes that don't really make it big time, go off into the third world type of markets where people go, hey, that's a cheap airplane. I can fly it. Nobody cares about it. Nobody wants it, so I can get a good price on it, and it's still a good airplane. So I'm going to talk about those aspects here as I get into the article. So I hope you find this interesting. Now, the Dornier 328 jet, I flew the earlier version, the prop model, about 3 years earlier, and I flew that out of Oberhofen, Germany, just outside of Munich. It was a Luftwaffe airfield that they used to defend the city of Munich. And in fact, when I was in the office of the president talking to him about it, he had this picture up on the wall, this black and white picture, this view down of the airfield, and I kept kind of glancing at it, and he kind of laughed and said, "Yo, that is the airfield out there." But that's when the Focke 190s were all stationed there to defend it, and they were in revetments to protect them, from the Allied bombing. And he said, actually, they just bulldozed over those revetments, and he says a lot of those 190s are out there buried underground. So it was very interesting. But this time, they were doing an integration of the Avionics, the Primus 2000, with Honeywell. And so this was in the Phoenix area at the Deer Valley Airport, which I flew my little 310 in there when I was visiting my daughter when she lived out there. And I think a lot of people in that area, you're probably familiar with that nice little airport north of the Phoenix area. But that's me, young me, standing in front of the Dornier 328 jet, and you can kind of see on the side there, they make you know that it's the 328. And the red arrow points to the pitot boom. Now, this isn't your normal little pitot boom. After you certify the aircraft and stuff like that, and they usually put them on the side because you have the radar there in front. But this is the long extended boom to make sure you're in clean air to get all the good data on the airflow. So you get good calibration type of data. Now, the one thing I must comment on it, I mean, okay, Daimler Benz. This was a beautifully built, beautifully designed, and beautifully built aircraft. I mean, the fit and finish on this thing, it was like you were sitting in a Mercedes. I mean, the thing was just absolutely beautiful put together, and the Primus 2000. Now this is back in the mid 90s, and this was where we were going from CRTs to LCD displays, and these CRTs were actually very bright. They were very good CRTs for the technology at the time, but this was still early in the phase over from CRT technology to LCD technology because, it took a while to develop good LCD technology. I mean, we all take it for granted now, but at the time, I was out at the Honeywell plant earlier and looking at the display, and I'm looking forward at my display in the left seat, and I look over to the co-pilot's display, and I can't read his screen because they didn't have, I think they call it super twist on the LCDs where you have the off-axis viewing. I mean, the earlier ones you had to look straight on. You get off-axis and you can't see anything. And I commented to the engineer. He says, I can't see the co-pilot's instruments. And he goes, well, why? You got your instruments. You don't need to see the co-pilot instruments. And I said, no, there's a lot of reasons I would need to see the co-pilot's instruments, to cross-check, verify, or if I had a problem with mine even, So they were not quite aware that that was a requirement. And that's why, I really enjoyed our committee being early involved with a lot of these programs and situations like that because we were able to prevent a lot of later problems, I guess you would say. And here's also a view, a little bit more of the overhead panel there, and that's the illustrious me sitting in the left seat. Now, as you know, the derivation of this, it came from the 328. They originally had it as a prop model because basically, and I'll talk a little bit about the different in engines, but, ooh, those propellers, people don't like propellers. They're scary because it obviously is an indication that the airplane, it's not one of those safe ones. It's like you're flying in my Great Lakes or 310, those obviously it's a less sophisticated airplane because it uses propellers, and pilots obviously who fly in them would not be as good. Propeller pilots are never good as jet pilots. Okay, right. Okay. Well, the thing is, it's public perception. So they took this aircraft and basically hung jet engines on it. So it's an interesting transition in that respect. And I've got I include a test report, quite detailed test report. Now, a lot of this is just historical, because almost hysterical, but historical, because I'm sure there's not a lot of Dornier 328 jet pilots out there, or even the prop ones, who are going to look at this. I mean, there's some, but it's not like if I was talking to 777 pilots. So this is a much smaller group, let's put it that way. But the Dornier company, it was sad when it went out of business a couple years later because they had quite a important historical background. I mean, there's a lot of history with this company. But there was a lot of competition. There was a lot of expansion. They had the 328 jet. They had a whole bunch of derivations. They were kind of the 728, the 928, just lengthened longer. Because the 328 jet, that's just a little 32 passenger aircraft, and that's good for extremely small routes. But most of the airliners wanted something that would fit in, that was looked like a 737 but carried less passengers, so it could be more economical. And of course, there's always dangers when you try to grow too fast. Lufthansa was very interested in these, derivative type aircraft, and of course, this is an artist's rendition, but they were interested in that aircraft for their market. And of course, the 928, the same situation there. This was going to be an aircraft that it kept getting a little bit bigger, still smaller than a 737. Although the fuselage on the Dorniers was, it was a nice, wide, roomy fuselage. But like I said, I had a lot of interaction with the engineers and the pilots, and I was at a Society of Experimental Test Pilots meeting over in Regensburg, Germany, and we had a lot of the Dornier people there, and I got to meet a lot more of the test pilots. I mean, I had quite a bit of interaction, but this time I got to meet with the families of the test pilots, the wives and things like that. So it's, you develop a nice relationship because you go out to quite nice dinners. When you come to a place like this, the foreign chapters of Society of Experimental Test Pilots, they like to put on a really good show. So that's why we had the government of Batavia, represented by the Secretary of State. They're putting on a very nice reception dinner for us. But unfortunately, just a short 2 years later, they file for bankruptcy and the company goes under. And so a company with a very long, proud history just goes under. And of course, all the people that I had associated with, knew, and developed personal relationships are out of a job. The prototypes that they were building, very optimistic ideas about how well they would do and stuff like that. They ended up, of course, being scrapped. But now, if you're still with me and want to find out about this aircraft, we're going to talk about it. Of course, as I talked about before, we had a very detailed test plan that was developed by a lot of my committee members who have a lot of very good flight test background. Actually, much more than I did at the time. One of them was the head of the military F-15 program for a while. Others taught at the test pilot school. I mean, these were extremely qualified people, and I was able to bring some really wonderful people onto my committee. And in fact, I'm going to do a video where I talk about some of the politics of who I was able to bring onto the committee, and people that I regret to this day that I could not bring onto the committee because I didn't have a slot for them due to politics. And there were some really outstanding people I could not bring on the committee, but I digress. I'll talk about that in a later video because I think it's an interesting aspect. I've also included a very detailed early flight testing report that for those people who are interested in flight test and all that sort of stuff and development of these aircraft, and especially in this aircraft, this is a very interesting special case because we go from an aircraft originally built with turboprops to one with jets, and there's an interesting interaction in that respect. All right, so this article was published in March of '99. I didn't make cover billing. ALPA, I think, probably considered that an airplane that only held 32 passengers wasn't worth getting its mention on the cover. But there I am on the inside next to the green arrow. Not the last article, second to the last, but okay, just how it goes in the publishing business. All right, so there's a very much younger picture of me getting ready to do the flight evaluation in the cockpit. And as I mentioned, I originally flew the Dornier 328 prop aircraft over in Oberhoferhofen, Germany, Munich, outside of there at the factory, the Daimler-Benz site. And they had brought the jet version over to the U.S., to Phoenix, at the Deer Valley Airport, because that's where Honeywell has a facility there, and they were integrating the Primus 2000 Avionics suite. So, of course, you want to be, it works best if you got the whole cadre of engineers there. So that was very helpful in integrating it. And like I mentioned, the original prop version had two Pratt & Whitney 119Bs that developed 2180 shaft horsepower, and they were replaced with the Pratt & Whitney 306Bs, which generate 6,050 pounds of thrust each. And these on the typical stage length, now you just can't get by the economics. 400 nautical miles or less, turboprops are more economical, and this whole thing is based on people's perception that props are dangerous. So turboprops just are more efficient. So on a 400-mile stage length, going from jet engines from turboprops, they burn about 1,000 pounds more of fuel on the same stage length. So it's not as economical, but it's perceived to be a more sophisticated and safe aircraft. Okay, well, the this article, by the way, it's included in the comment section, a link to this and the other flight test article on where they talk about, as I mentioned before, of doing the kind of conversion there and some of the preliminary information that's included also. But okay, let's talk about some of the specifics of this aircraft. It's got a maximum cruise speed of 0.66 Mach, or 408 knot true airspeed, with a range of 1,050 nautical miles. And it flies maximum altitude of 350 with 32 passengers. Now, okay, this works in Europe more with the slower speeds, and I noticed that on the Saab 2000 and some of the other aircraft. It's even though this is a jet, it's not a fast jet. And I talked to him a lot about that 0.6 6 Mach at 350 does not integrate well into our system. We've got enough flying speed bumps with the old 737-200s, which are gone now, of course. But, slow aircraft are not your friend in the U.S. environment. But, okay, which is probably one reason that they didn't do terribly well over here also, just because of the integration. Now, the airplane has no auto throttles. Full, manual. You do all the throttle input yourself, but it does have detents. It's kind of like the old Etzel, if you guys are really old. Remember that, where you push a button for drive and reverse. You basically put it kind of a little bit like the Airbus. You put it into a detent for max cruise, max climb, and toga thrust. Now, when you go to start this thing, it uses pneumatic air instead of the more typical battery power with the starter generators on a turboprop. So we're using bleed air, and being a flight test aircraft, they were very kind to me because you go over in Europe and things are in kilograms, and of course kilograms is about half of pounds. And I was actually on an Airbus. We're getting ready to go. I'm digressing here. I was on an Airbus 320, and I got Terry Lutz with me, who later became an Airbus test pilot and later took over the committee from me. Terry's with me, and we're in the cockpit there, and he looks down at the fuel load on the 320, and we're going from Paris to Toulouse, and he looks down on that, and he sees a very low number, and he turns to me and he says, am I reading that correctly? And I turned to him and I said, it's in kilograms, not pounds. And he goes, oh. So, yeah, for us, looking at some of those figures can be kind of scary. Now, of course, one thing they like to do for standardization as far as flight instruments are concerned, they like to have either single or dual cues. Now, the single cue is supposedly not as precise as the dual cue. I always like kind of tucking it up in there. Now, but the dual cue, they figure you can be more accurate with that, and that's why that's a very common display at the time. Now, at one time, you could fly with a single cue or a dual cue, like on the 727. We had a lot of the old Sperry's that had the dual cue, and we had more the 109s or something, if I remember that correctly, on the 27s that were the single cue. And I kind of had liked the single cue and had a preference, but that kind of went away. But one thing interesting on this aircraft, and it might have been because it was flight test. I don't, the airlines would have a preference for this, but you could select single or dual cue. And I think that kind of can become a possible safety issue on keeping currency and stuff like that. I don't know, but what if the captain had a single cue and the first officer had dual cue? All sorts of interesting little safety implications there, but I digress. But you could select which either type of flight director you wanted, which I thought was rather interesting, and I don't know how actually it worked in the real field if they said no, you only get one. But now this aircraft, even with the high wing and the T-tail there, it had very good Dutch roll characteristics. In fact, at high altitude, I didn't really see that the yaw damper, we flew it with it on and off, was very necessary. The yaw damper at lower altitude, though, became much more of a nice to have, because in turbulence, it helped quite a bit. Now, if you want to read the articles, you can get some of the more details on speeds in this. Oh, one thing, the aircraft has ground spoilers, but it doesn't have flight spoilers, and it's a pretty slick aircraft, but it still had reasonable descent type of capabilities and stuff like that. But it's always interesting on stall warning configurations. This aircraft has as you approach the stall, it has a loud bell. A bell rings, and it also has instead of the typical horn or stick shaker, it has a stick shaker, and then if you don't pay attention to that, it goes a little bit farther and you get the stick pusher. Now, I did a lot of stalls and clean and dirty, and during the clean stall, the aircraft had very good stall characteristics, recovery. I didn't get a tendency to get into a secondary stall. And the nice thing about the engines, they're mounted right through the center of gravity there. So when you apply, normally if you got like a 737 with the low wing and low engines, you get a pitch up when you apply thrust, and you get a pitch down when you retard thrust. Of course, that's the interesting thing about the flight control systems, unlike the 777 or the Airbus, that they take all that out, so you don't have that what would be natural characteristic. One of the advantages of fly-by-wire flight control systems, but here they get around it by just putting it through the center of gravity. So you apply thrust, you don't get the pitch up, down, all that good stuff like that. It did have one interesting characteristic here that got me into a little bit of trouble later here, and that's a tendency when you first extend the flaps to get a really rather noticeable balloon. Would have been nice if they could have kind of designed that aspect a little bit better. But I'll tell you in a second how that got me into a bit of trouble. It's kind of like the Cessna 310s. You put down the first notch of flap and you get one heck of a balloon. Kind of like that is what it was kind of like. But we did some single engine work. We shut down shut down the right engine. And one thing interesting about this, it has a synchrophaser on the engines, which is kind of a holdover from having the props. You got the big fans out there. Anybody who flies, aircraft, large fans, most of the time the auto throttles take care of it now in the more advanced aircraft. But when you were flying like a 737-200, you actually had to kind of sync them yourself, so you didn't get the womp womp womp, which you'd get on a jet engine, not props, but jet engine, just because the fans would be a little bit out of phase. But okay, we're coming back, and it was kind of funny coming over Sky Harbor with one engine shut down. We're going over to Deer Valley, and the yaw damper is good in turbulence, but it's not certified for landing. So we had to shut it off, which is kind of like certain more. I don't want to say primitive designs, but it wasn't certified for landing, so we had to shut it off. But we're coming in, and I'm going to make making a series of landings here, and we restart the engine, and I'm coming around to make a normal no flap landing, and as we're going down the runway, they decide, okay, we're gonna lower flaps for takeoff, and I got the ballooning at that point, and when we select the flaps to 12, and it kind of caught me off guard, and we got airborne with both engines at idle. And I think just about everybody in the aircraft had their hands come to the throttles, and that's where the quick response of the engine was very nice, because the engines quickly came up very fast, and I was able to fly the aircraft out of ground effect without banging it back on the runway. So that was a nice aspect. Another little thing that's kind of interesting is in flying the single engine approaches, they have a tab that assists you below 160 knots with a little bit extra rudder, kind of an anti-servo tab like you had on the 727s. But above 160 knots, it figures you don't need that extra rudder, and you could actually overstress the vertical stabilizer, so it takes it out. Well, that transition, single engine as I was accelerating, was reasonably noticeable and rather, it really got your attention, and it wasn't a very nice transition in that effect. But once I did my final touchdown, the ground spoilers came up nicely. There are no, as you can see in the pictures, there are no thrust reversers. But this aircraft, with its design, it's fairly low speed. You decelerate fairly rapidly, and you don't want reverse thrust at low speeds anyway, because you could blow crap back up in the engine. So a lot of respects, if you have kind of low landing and approach speeds, you don't really need the reversers as such, and a lot of these smaller type aircraft can get away from it. But like I said, we were anticipating a lot more development from Dornier, but with all the really cutthroat type of competition between them, a lot of aircraft And manufacturers, unfortunately, were quickly weeded out. Very unfortunate, because like anytime you get to know a bunch of people, and all of a sudden they're on the street, and the companies with a great history is down. It's kind of sad. So that is a little bit about the Dornier 328 jet. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and thanks for watching.